Destiny's Child were an American R&B slash pop girl group from Houston in Texas. In 1990, they were formed as Girls Time with a Y in time, and there were 6 of them, including Beyonce Knowles, their sometimes frontwoman and their most successful member as a solo artist. Kelly Rowland was also there, who I think made it to the end. They competed in a TV talent show called Star Search and lost. But over the next few years, they tried different names. So they've tried something fresh, Cliche, The Dolls, and Destiny before becoming Destiny's Child in 1996. By this time, Beyonce's father, Matthew, was their manager. About 2 albums in, they hit the big time, got huge success and sales. They lost 2 of their then 4 members and gained a couple others. They soon, after that, settled on being a threesome with Beyonce and Kelly, who I mentioned, and Michelle Williams, who was a new arrival. 5 albums in, having sold many, many copies and being one of the world's biggest R&B pop acts, in 2006 they disbanded amicably, all 3 of them at that point having solo careers. Hi, my name's Dan. So this was Destiny's Child's 2nd album, and it was their breakthrough album. It was a massive success. Some critics liked it, some were less impressed. And my history with this is that I have heard it before. In fact, I've reviewed it before. So before I started doing these video reviews, I had a blog and I was reviewing from a different list. But what I had is an amalgamated list that I'd done myself of what I was then claiming might be the 1,000 greatest albums of all time, and it was on that list and I reviewed it. I got to about 400 odd when I found this list, the acclaimed music list, and I am much more confident in this list than I have ever had in my own list. So I'm following this list, but also it's 3 times longer, which gives me 3 times more albums to get my teeth into. Anyway, so I have reviewed this before, and some of what I'm going to say is taken from that review. I have listened to it again. My opinion has changed slightly, but not a huge amount. So the demographic that this is clearly aimed at is teenage girls. I'm not one of those, so I'm very much out of my comfort zone. Everybody needs people in creative arts to be a voice for them. And so potentially teenage girls more than anybody, or certainly as much as anybody, need people to be their voice. So it's definitely not my voice. I'm looking on the outside in on this. I feel like that this is somewhat the link between what I think of as the 90s girl groups, and the kind of most prominent of those was the Spice Girls, and the 2000s onwards, what I now think of as modern R&B pop, which is the music that drove me off the radio and got me back into listening to albums because I got so fed up with it. So some of this, stylistically, is I think the precursors of this music, the modern pop that I am not hugely a fan of. So let's talk about the music. Actually, on the album, I'd say there are 2 main flavours of music here. So one of them is kind of soul-based, smooth, kind of pop stuff, sometimes with quite complex chords, very much kind of descended from Barry White and Marvin Gaye and people like that. And I can hear elements of slower Spice Girls songs in there, that kind of feel. So, yeah. That's musically, I find that kind of acceptable. The other flavour is the more R&B style, which is mostly a bit faster and more empty, and it's very kind of sample based. It's the kind of stuff where you get a little kind of flick of guitar, and then it's used as a sample, and it starts to sound quite fake and plastic as a result. There's also big gaps in between things, and the drums are often I've got hear that the drums are staccato. Of course, drums are staccato, but they've kind of got start and stop stuff going on, and it doesn't really settle into a groove. The bass that's used throughout this album is a really thick synth bass sound. It's actually not a bad sound, really. I guess if you like this sort of thing, the drum sound so often with the sort of thing I complain about how tinny the drums sound. They don't so much on this, so I was more in favour of the percussion here. There's a lot of little different percussion sounds being used. There's obviously a bass drum. What is in the place of where a snare would be is more of a click rather than a snare sound. There's little bits of triangle. I love bits of that very high tink, that kind of sound from triangles. So that's nice. But it often seems to have this kind of almost stop-start feel going on. Modern pop production has taken this sort of thing to extremes in the last, I would say, 15 years. Backing tracks have become more and more minimal like this, and I think that this is possibly where that started at sort of the roots of that modern pop. So I would say that musically, this was definitely, the writing was on the wall as far as pop was concerned, not in a good way. And I don't want to say it's absolutely terrible. It's all right. It just leaves me a bit cold, really. So let's move on to the singing. Very, very technically strong singing, layers and layers and lots of harmonies, intricate production going on here. And the singing, it sounds really skillful kind of throughout. I presume that they did these vocal harmonies live, and that's impressive if they were able to do that. And actually, the fact that the backing is quite minimal leaves space for all this vocal stuff going on. So at times it's quite, I'm kind of feeling it's well done. It's kind of beautiful. It just feels a bit too clinical, really, because it's just so produced. I think, well, definitely the track that I like best, which is not necessarily, it was a reasonable amount, was what they've put as the outro, which is a version of Amazing Grace. So Amazing Grace has got a long history of being able to be adapted in many, many different ways. So lots of different musical interpretations. I love the words for Amazing Grace. I thoroughly subscribe to it. And there's a great tune and chords that really lend themselves to be messed about with, so you get lots of different things going. And gospel music has particularly had lots of different stabs at Amazing Grace. The version that Destiny's Child have done on this album is done with some amazing harmonies. Technically, it's really beautiful, but actually, again, it doesn't feel like it's got the soul and the meaning that some other versions have achieved. But it's still my favourite track on the album, easily. So the thing that I'm going to need to come to now is the lyrics. And I had remembered what I felt last time when I reviewed it, and was very carefully listening to the lyrics this time through. And I have some issues here. This is not going to surprise people who've seen quite a few of my reviews. The problem that I've got here is that, firstly, there are some what I think are quite damaging messages in some of these songs, and secondly, that it's because it's targeted at a teenage girl demographic, and that's a demographic that can be relatively easily influenced, I would say. Then I think that giving songs about relationships and they are all the songs about relationships. In fact, it's kind of, they've got this overlying conceit about it being the commands for modern relationships. And there are songs here. There are some that are not as bad as others, but there are songs here about being demanding in your relationships, insisting on things are absolutely my way, that legitimize cheating, that build up rivalry, that highlight the idea of using sex as a tool in relationships. It also goes along with, I'm not a great fan of the hypersexualized image of bands like this. I think that's where the Spice Girls fall down as well, in my opinion. So I think that there's a danger here that some of these messages could actually have lifelong damaging effects on people who listen to them, which is, I think, it's tragic that this sort of stuff is around. There are other songs that are not so bad. Possibly my favourite of the others, other than Amazing Grace, is Bugaboo, which is about being bugged by a boy that you're not interested in, which is kind of bordering on stalking, I think. I'm not really sure how I felt about the song about confessions. I tried to listen quite hard. I wasn't really quite sure what it was trying to get across. But it could have been okay. So that's my biggest negative. So let's summarise all this up then. So, okay. Vocally, brilliant. Musically, okay to production-wise, absolutely meticulous and perfect. Message-wise, patchy. I'd rather listen to the Spice Girls, generally, who I reckon had more sass and less whine. And that's the other thing, is I felt like this album was a bit on the whiny side. So that's what I think. I'm quite prepared for people to disagree with me. I always am. So please tell me what you think, whether it's agreement or disagreement. And that's it from me for now.
Hey, how you doing? Yeah, I'm doing mighty fine. Last time I sing, it's been a long time. Stop smiling at me, get that look off your face. Please don't even front, stop being so fake. I know you do not like me and you made it very clear. You're always talking about me from what I hear. Always put me down when you thought that you could. I want you to know